previous video, we looked at the shell page that is new to Xamarin 4.0. And we used the shell page to create a flyout for the 70s music app that I created this weekend. And the shell allows us to go between different pages of this app. So I'm going to click on Search for Artist, and it navigates to that page. Now, one of the other new controls in Xamarin 4.0 is the collection view. And collection view is a great way of being able to display data from some type of collection, whether it's an array, whether it's a list, dictionary, whatever. And here is the collection view. This is the gray area, and you can create columns and display the data from a collection. I used a list in this case. We're going to look at this video on how to work with the collection view, and it really is a much nicer way of organizing and displaying the data rather than using the older list view. And what we're going to do in this project is we're going to recreate this page just as a single app, and you could extrapolate from that how to create this 70s music app that I created, viewing by release date, viewing by peak, or searching for a song, searching for an artist, or going to our title screen and using the flyout menu from the video before. Originally, I was going to have this whole thing be your project for this course, and I decided it was just too much. So we're going to focus just on doing one page. So with that, let's jump over to Visual Studio. I'm in Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new project. It's going to be a mobile app Xamarin.Forms project. We're going to name this one Search 70s Artist. And I use underscores between the words here. I've had some problems with spaces in names of Xamarin projects, so I recommend using one word, putting spaces there. And let's just create this. I'm going to use a blank template. We're going to do it for Android and iOS. Even though I'm on a PC, I don't have my Mac connected, so I can't really build the iOS at this point. So we're going to click OK. And here's my new project. I have my Xamarin.Forms project, my Android project, and my iOS project. Now, one of the important things here is that the collection view is new in 4.0. So we need to go to our project menu and choose Manage NuGet Packages. We need to make sure we're using 4.0 or greater. Now, prior to 4.3, the collection view was viewed as experimental. And if you upgrade to 4.3, in that version, they have listed collection view as stable, and we don't need to mark it as experimental. But in case you might be working with an older version, I'm not going to upgrade. I'm going to leave it as 4.2 and show you how to mark that particular control, that beta control, as being experimental. So just make sure you have 4.0 or greater, and I'm going to close that. So I'm going to go into the Search 70s Artist for Android. We're going to go down to the main activity CS, and we're going to open that up. And in that main activity CS file, you'll find where it says base.onCreate save instance state. Right in front of that, I'm going to add another line of code that says forms.setFlags, and then it's a method. So in parentheses, I want to put collection view underscore experimental inside of quotes, and then my closing semicolon. Now I'm getting an error on forms because I need to come up here and add that I am using Xamarin.Forms. And once that comes in, then my error on forms goes away. I need to do the same thing on the iOS side. And in the iOS, there is the app delegate.cs. I'm going to open that up. And in that file, we have global Xamarin.Forms, forms, and init. And just before that, I'm going to add the same line, forms.setFlags, and in parentheses and in quotes, collection view underscore experimental. And I'm getting the same little error here, so I need to add that I am using Xamarin.Forms. And I'll close that file, make sure I save it. And now we can use the collection viewer if you're in a version of Xamarin.Forms between 4.0 and 4.3. We're going to bring in some data, and I've created a text file of all the songs from the 1970s by month that made it to the top 100. And I did that originally in a Excel spreadsheet, and then I exported the Excel spreadsheet into a tab delimited file, and then in Microsoft Word I actually changed it to a vertical bar delimited file. So let me open up that data file. Here's my file. So I have 5 pieces of information in this data file. The first one is the year. The second column, and notice my columns here are separated by vertical bars or vertical pipes. 1970 is the year. The month was January 1. The third one here is the peak on the 100 list. Then I have the name of the artist and then the title. So let me just scroll down a little bit. So here is Seals and Crofts. The year was 1973. Came out in January of 73. Reached number 20. Seals and Crofts was the artist, and the song title was Hummingbird. So all this data, 5,400 and some records. I'm going to close that. Try to make sure I save this. And this data file is available in Canvas in the assignment area for this assignment. And so I'm going to come into my Xamarin.Forms. I'm going to right click on the Xamarin.Forms project, choose Add. I want to add an existing item. And the item that I want to include, is this Decade 97 text. I'm going to click Add. That's going to add it into my project. Right now the build action is none. I'm going to change the build action to be embedded resource, so it gets embedded into my project and compiled with it. Okay, so that's our data file. We're going to create a class to hold this information. So I'm going to right click on my Xamarin.Forms, choose Add, New Item. My new item is going to be a class. I'm going to name this class Song, the capital S. I'm going to click Add. And now we have this new class added to our project. Here's the information for it. We have a class name. We're going to create some properties of this class. So if you don't have to waste time watching me type, I'm going to copy and paste some information here that I wrote previously. And here are my properties. So I have year, month, peak, artist, and title. That's the data we're going to get from our data file. And I'm going to get and set all those. Then we have 2 read-only properties. One is called release. It's going to be a read-only, so I only have a get, and same with peak display. And these are going to be strings. So the release is going to be the year and the month combined into a string. The peak display will be peak displayed as a string. Now we need a constructor. And once again, I'm going to paste in a constructor. So we're going to take year, month, and peak as integers, and artist and title as strings. And we're going to set those first five properties to that data. That's all going to come from our data file. I'm going to set release equal to and I do a couple spaces here in quotes, and that was to actually give me a little margin when we display this in our collection view. I'm going to concatenate to that year.toString, concatenate a literal string of a hyphen, and month.toString. I want to format month as 2 digits. So if it's January, it'll be 01. If it's May, it'll be 05. And then we'll look at peak. Now there's some items in the data that don't have a peak value, and that's because they were the B song of a 2-sided single. And I'm just going to have those I marked those as 101. So if peak is not 101, we're going to take peak and convert it to a string. If it is, we're just going to display it as nothing. And I had to put a value in for the integers, so I had to put in 101 or something else. So we're just going to redisplay that out as just a space. And that's why I created a string value for peak display. Okay, that is our song class. I'm going to close that. And we can close our data file. This is probably a good time to rebuild our solution so that we can access that song class as we create more data. Okay, I'm going to open up the main page XAML. And there's our default main page. We have our label with welcome to Xamarin.Forms. So I'm going to take my label, I'm going to give it a name. Xname equals, and we'll just call it LBO welcome. And I'm going to go to the code behind. I'm going to add in a couple more directives here. One will be using system.io. We need to create a stream to read in that data from our data file, even though it's embedded, and using system.reflection. We're going to create a global variable that will be a list of type song. I'm just going to call it decade. This is going to contain all the records for the 1970 songs, and it's going to be a new list of type song, my parentheses, and my semicolon. And then in main page, we're going to create a method called populate songs. We need to create that method. And again, just save some time in this video, I'm going to paste that method. Okay, so here's the populate songs method. I had a little comment in here to set decade 1970.txt build action to embedded resource. We already did that. We're going to create an assembly and create a variable called resource name, which is going to be tied to our decade 1970 text. Now, what I need here is the namespace before that. And I copied this from a previous project where I had the namespace was BO5 70s music. So I need to change this to search _ 70s artists. That's the name of our namespace. So that way I can find that embedded data file called decade 1970.txt. We're going to create a stream from that resource name and a stream reader of SR as a new stream reader, and we're going to open up that stream. No different than reading a data file from an external file. We're using a stream reader the same way. We're going to read each data one line at a time. And so I have a while sr.peak method does not equal -1. And we can get rid of this little for loop. I was experimenting with something else earlier. So I'm going to read in one line at a time. I'm going to split it based on that vertical pipe and put that into an array, a string array called XYZ. It's going to hold 5 values. So int y is going to be my year equals int.parse xyz element 0. Same with m is an integer. It's going to have element 1 of xyz, parsing that into an integer. P is the peak integer. And since some are blank in the text file, we're going to check to see if we trim that data if it's nothing, if it's blank. And if it's not blank, meaning it contains an integer, we're going to parse that integer from xyz element 2 and place it in P. Otherwise, we're going to set P to 101. And that 101 are those songs that are on the B side of a record that in the data that I received did not have a peak number. A is going to be our artist. That's going to be string. That's element 3 from XYZ. Our title is element 4. That goes into a string called T. And then I call decade.add. So I'm going to add to my decade list a new song and pass it those values, YMP, which are integers, A and T are strings. And then I'll call a method called updateList, and we're going to build that. So we want private void updateList. Sorry, update display list. And what we're going to do here is take that LBL welcome. For now, we'll add some more things in this a little bit later. But LBL welcome dot text equals, and we're going to take decade and get the count of it and convert that to a string. That's going to tell us how many records were added into our data file. I'm just going to concatenate to that. We'll say songs from the 1970s made it to the top 100. Now I'm getting an error here on LBL welcome, and I think that's because when I did my main page, I gave this name, but I haven't basically built my or rebuilt my project. So I'm going to go to project and just, or I'm going to go to build and just choose rebuild. And hopefully once it's finished rebuilding, that LBL welcome does not exist in the current context error will go away. And it did. Took a little time for it to be recognized, but the squiggly went away. And now I'm probably ready to test. So this should read in our data. One thing I don't do is I don't close my stream. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here, sr.close. And let's see if it reads in the data. So I'm going to run this on the emulator, my Galaxy 9 emulator. And it loads and shows me 5,423 songs, that should put an S there, from the 1970s made it to the top 100. So it read in my data. They are now in our list called Decade, which consists of instances of our song class, 5,423 instances of our song class. And now we want to display that data in our XAML page. So let's go back to the XAML page. The focal point of our project is a collection view that's going to contain all of our data. So I'm going to add the collection view. I've already written this code, so again, I'm just going to paste. Let me walk you through it. So I added a collection view. You can drag it over from the toolbox if you wanted. I gave it a name of CV Songs. Then we have a collection view template, item template. This is going to determine how the information is displayed. It's basically creating our rows for us. And that item template contains a data template. And I decided to use a grid. And you could do this with a horizontal stack layout. I think grid works really well here. That grid is going to have a binding context to decade. That was our list. And I'm going to give it a padding of just 1. Then I'm going to create some columns for that grid. So I have 3 columns. The first one is 60 units. That's going to contain our year and month. The next column has a width of 35. That's the peak value. And then the remaining column is everything that's left over in the width of our application. So I used an asterisk there. And that's going to contain our artist and the title of the song. Then I have a label. The label has text, and I'm using a binding value here, meaning it's going to draw the text from a collection. And here, the binding, because the binding context was decade, the binding is going to be the property release of that song. And remember, release was the year and the month as a string. The font size is 12. I want to put it in grid column 0, that's the far left one. I'm going to set the vertical alignment to center and the background color to light gray. I'm setting the background color to each of the labels because I want to create a little demarcation between the cells by using that padding of 1. I'm going to get a nice little background or white line between each of the cells and each of the rows. Another label. This one I bound to the peak display property of our decade, which is instances of songs. Set this font to 21, grid column 1, horizontal text alignment center, vertical text alignment center, and my background again is a light gray. On the third column, however, I'm going to use a stack layout. And I use a stack layout because I want to put 2 items here. I want to put the artist and I want to have the title of the song. And I'm going to do that as a stack, so the artist is on the top and the title is below that. And again, in that stack layout, I'm going to use a grid. And here I'm just using 2 grid rows. So one has a height of 16, one has a height of 18. I played around with these numbers a little bit to find what I thought looked best, at least for my device. And then again, I create 2 more labels. This one is bound to the artist property of our song class, which is coming from the instances of decade. I set the font size to 14. The grid row is 0, so my top row. Attributes, I want to make it bold. And the vertical alignment I set to end. Probably doesn't make much difference on the vertical alignment, but I wanted to try to bring this down inside this row definition a little bit so these 2 items came a little closer together. I don't know that I accomplished that with the vertical text alignment end and then the next one having vertical text alignment start, but that was my goal. So my next label is going to be bound to the title. The font size is 11. This is going to be in row 1. And again, vertical text alignment start to try to bring it up towards the top. That's the extent of my grid, the extent of my stack layout. Here's the ending of that entire grid. Ending a data template, ending a collection view, and then collection view. I'm going to rebuild my solution. I'm going to go back to my CS, and on the update display, I need to tell it the item source for CV song. So I add the code here, cvsongs.itemSource equals decade. Now I'm going to run my project. And so I have my label showing me how many songs are brought in, and here is my collection view containing all of that data from 1970 to 1979. What I want to be able to do is to search this data for a particular artist. So I'm going to, in order to do that, I'm going to go back to my code. Let's stop our project. I'm going to add another list here. And we're going to call it queried songs. And I'm going to initially start with all those songs, but I want to use queried songs in finding all the records that have a particular artist's name in them. So there's going to be a subset of decade. Initially, though, for SR, or for when we read in our populated songs, we're going to create queried songs dot clear. We're going to clear any data that's in there, and then we're going to misspelled queried, so queried songs, and then we'll say for each song ABC in decade. I'm going to go through the decade. I'm going to add each song into my list of queried songs. Queried songs dot add. What we're going to add in is ABC. So I'll add in all the songs from the decade into queried songs initially. And I'm going to change my item source down here to queried songs. So again, the reason I did that is because eventually we want queried songs to be a subset of decade. But let's see if this still works. I'm going to run it again. and there's my data. Okay, so now we need a mechanism for the user to search for some songs. I'm going to go back to my XAML and make some changes here. So above the collection view, we're going to add an entry form for the user to enter the name of an artist they want to search for. So I'm going to replace my label with some pre-written code again. And I have 3 stack layouts here. The first stack layout is a horizontal orientation, contains 2 labels. One named LBL page title, and the text is going to be search for artist. And I made that black. I'm going to center that horizontally and set the font size to 18 bold. The next one is LBL stats. Right now the text is showing all, and horizontal options of center. I set the text color to light slate gray, font size 14, it's a little bit smaller, and bold. Okay, then I have a stack layout below that. So this is going to be a second row. And this one also is horizontal. It has a label with the text of search for. It has an entry, which I named TXT search. I gave it a width of 160 and a background color of yellow. And that yellow then creates a little box for the user to enter into and draws their attention to it. And then I added a button, which I named BTN search. My text is search. Gave it a steel blue background. And I gave it a clicked event of search for artist. We'll write that code in a minute. And text color of white. And then the last thing I did here is I added a stack layout for headers of my list, my collection view. So, horizontal orientation for the stack layout. I have a label. Text is release. Notice the width is 60. That corresponds to my column width. Font size is small, bold. Next label. Peak is the text. Its width is 35. That's the width of my second column of the collection view. And I centered this one. And the last one is artist/song, and that's going to take the remaining values. Since I made these start and expand, they'll start from the left and move over. Okay, so we need to create our clicked search for artist code. I'm going to go back to the XAML.cs. And by the way, the LBL welcome no longer exists. Remember, it was now LBL, it's LBL stats that I want to put this information in. So I'm going to change this to LBL stats. I'm going to modify this a little bit to have a square bracket plus the number of songs, and I'm just going to say songs. And then closing square bracket. Now, I'm getting error in LBL stats because once again, it's not recognizing I changed that or added to the XAML. So just to make sure everything works well here, I'm going to rebuild again. And that error went away. So now we need to create our search for artist method. So again, I'm going to paste in some code here. And here's my search for artist, object center, event args. I want to get the item they search for in that text box. So I'm going to convert that to a lowercase. So the searching is case insensitive. I'm going to put it into a variable called search name. I'm going to clear my queried songs, and then cvsongs.itemSource equals null. So I'm going to basically get rid of all the data that's in our CV songs. Probably not going to see this happen in the updating of the page, so you probably don't need that line of code. But then I'm going to use a LINQ process. So var items equals from XYZ in decade, where xyz.artist.toLower, that's a method, so I need parentheses, dot contains, and it's going to contain the search name, which is already lowercase. I'm going to order that by xyz.release. We want to have this sorted by the release date. And if that is true, we're going to select XYZ. So items is going to consist of all the songs that match that criteria and sorted by release. Now, for each song ABC in items, this is our subset of the decade, we're going to add that to queried songs. And then I'm going to call update display list. I'm going to change the title that's in my LBL page title label. And to do that, I'm going to pass it a string. So here I passed it search for, and I want a single quote, concatenate my search name, and a single quote in quotes. So update list now needs to take a string value. I'll just call it T. We're going to set CV songs item source back to queried songs again. And the stats, this time, rather than equaling decade, I want it to equal queried songs. So how many songs are in the queried list? So if I search for Jackson Browne, maybe there's 5 songs. If I search for Rolling Stones, there might be 20 songs. So I also need to update that title. So LBL title, what's page title? LBL page title dot text equals the value of T. So I also need to pass a string value up here. And this is going to be simply search for artist. And now let's test. Here's my project. I'm now seeing 5,423 songs, which are all the artists. And I'm going to search in here for Rolling Stones. There are all the songs from Rolling Stones released in the 1970s, starting 1971, May, down through 1979. Which the last one was in 78, December 78 was the last one in the 70s. And you can see the artist, the name of the song, and where it peaked at. Let's do another search. I want to search just for a partial name. Let's just search for Pat. And here I'm getting a whole bunch of people who are named Pat. Patti Smith, Pat Benatar, Spiral Staircase featuring Pat Upton. So that seems to be working. Now, if I just delete everything here and click search, it's going to take me back to the 5,423 songs. And I missed the search for here. Oh, because I'm searching for blank. So maybe if that's blank, I want to have this go back to search for artist. Let's fix that. So if I didn't have anything in the search name, my string that's being passed to update display list is search for single quote, single quote. So I'm going to add some code in here. If T equals search for single quote, we're going to set the LBL title text to search for artist. Now I may need to escape those 2 single quotes, but let's try this one more time. So again, I'm going to search for Queen. I get 12 songs, and then if I search for nothing, I am told search for artists, and I back to those 5,000 and some songs. So that's exactly what I want. Everything seems to be working. We're going to call this project good. So go ahead and create that, and zip it, and submit it for a grade.